Hey there, Russ here. Welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to do it. We're going to do in real time, we're going to make a wood hinge. If you remember, I made 4 blanks just like this a while back, and I was talking about how I was going to make these so you could watch me make them. Well, I've decided I'm just going to do it in one video. I'm going to do it in the same style of the Woodwright shop, where Roy Underhill would go from start to finish. The only difference here to there is my bench is probably a little messier than his, but that's another story. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to go from this blank here that I've already laid out my pencil lines on, and we're going to turn it into this, which is, if I can get that straight on, which this is a nice little working hinge. And it works like this, or like this. So you can change the look of this hinge pretty quickly by putting one like this at the top if it's on a door, and then put the one on the bottom like this. Or you could put one like this at the bottom and then one at the top like this to get a look at the top, and you get the same thing. So we're going to make this from this blank of wood. Let's talk about the pins real quick. Now this is an extra pin that I made because most of the time when I make my hinges, I almost always really actually use 1/8 inch steel rod. Now I know the last one you saw me make, that stick hinge, I used a finish nail on one and I used a bamboo skewer on the other hinge, and that was just to show you that there are lots of ways you can make hinges. But I have found that I really like using the 1-inch steel rod. The 1/8 inch steel rod. Now I also have this in brass normally. I keep both, but actually I'm out of the brass one, and this is all I got of the steel one. So I think I'm gonna have to get some more here pretty soon. But anyway, the steel rod is really the key. Now because that is 1/8 inch, I used 3 different drill bits for this. I used the 1/8 inch drill bit, and I also used the 7/64 drill bit, which is 1/64 of an inch smaller, and I used the 9/64 drill bit, which is, yes, 1/64 of an inch larger. And you will use those 3 bits. A lot of times when I'm putting this together, especially when I drill the holes out, I always drill them out to begin with at that 7/64 inch, until I'm sure I'm happy with the way everything is. And then I oversize the hole from there to the next size till I get it to a point where I can use this. And I did find that if I go to the 9/64 so the pin goes in and out easily, is the best way to do this. You don't want that pin to be tight going into these. And so if you made them 1/8 of an inch, this pin, you would have to tap it in with a hammer, and that hinge would actually work tight for a very long time. So you can do that if you want. I have found to make it a little looser, it always works so much better, easier to put on and off. And like I said, especially during this time when I'm trying to shape this so that it works good, because we'll go over that, but you are going to have to work with this even after you cut it all out and sand it. You have to do some final touching to make it work exactly the way you want it to. And we'll go over all that here before we're done. So you do want to have a little temporary pin that you can put in and out, and I just used a 1/2 inch dowel rod and crazy glued that in place so that I have this pin. Now I actually have a set of hinges on the cabinet here in the shop where I used removable pins. They all have this style pin in them, so that if I want to take the door off, I pull 2 pins and I can take the door off the cabinet. And sometimes you may want to do your hinges that way where the pin is removable. That's up to you, but it is a possibility. Most of the time, when I do the pin, I actually cut the pin shorter than the width of my hinge. If I set these 2 on the table right here, it's hard to see it, but there you can see it's actually shorter than the width of my wood by about a 1/16 of an inch. And that is that when I put this in there and I anchor it all the way in, I like it to be recessed just a little bit in the hole on both sides. Then when I put a drop of CA glue in the hole, that'll lock the pin in place and it won't try to creep in and out on you later on. So, and the CA glue will help you to do that. And then so then this thing will pivot on the pin here, and this pin will stay stationary in this part of the hinge. So if you go to that kind of pin, that's okay. And as you can see, they're a lot harder to get out when they don't have that knob on there. So, but I also find that I use my drill bit a lot of times, depending on what I drilled this out to, whatever size, I try to take that size drill bit a lot of times when I can't put the steel rod in there yet, but I can fit whatever size I had been drilling. I can fit that drill bit in there to give me a feel for how this thing is going to work. So sometimes I use the drill bit as a temporary pin to see how this goes. And as I get larger, I go to the bigger drill bit so that it fits on there more snug. But I also make sure that it's not touching or rubbing anywhere. And we'll talk about that in detail here shortly. So to begin with, what we want to do, I've already put a 7/64 drill bit in the drill press so that we can drill this out over there. And now when we drill this pin, we're only going to drill the holes here and here. We're not going to drill the hole for this finger yet. We'll do that when we go to do the final works right here when we come back. So we're going to take this over to the drill press and we're going to drill out this one here. I've laid it out where that is, and I put a center punch on it, on this pin here and on this one here. And I will tell you right now, they are laid out where they need to be. I was very careful. Very important you do that. So to lay that out, let's talk about that for just a second. I have my line across here, which is the depth of my finger, how tall that is, how much of a cutout there is, and I brought the line around to the side. And the reason I do that is now I'm going to mark it out to hit where that pin is going to be. And I don't actually put that dead center. If you look at this little drawing here, if you look at this drawing here, originally this thing was nice and straight across, and I drew a line across here to the corners down to the line corner. And where those two cross, that is your center line. That is where your center point is on this area of the finger. And when you drill this hole, when I punch with a punch for a starter for the hole, I actually drop it to just below where the two lines come together on the underneath side of where that cross point is, so that I offset this pin away from the top of it toward the line, just ever so slightly. And that is just so that when I ground this off eventually, like this, and when I round that off, you might actually take a little bit off this top here and shorten that distance. So by having a little bit extra, that'll keep you from getting into trouble and end up with too big a gap in your hinge. And we'll talk about the gap in the hinge here when we come back over here too. So to begin with, now that we know where we're going to do this, let's talk about the two ways we can actually drill this out. As long as you're sure you laid that out carefully, you can actually freehand drill that without any problem. What I do is I like to take a nice little straight board like this that I can set up on edge, and I'm just going to clamp it down right on my workbench, like so. And I will tell you now that my workbench is perfectly level, both directions. So, which is important if you're going to freehand drill, and make sure you drill that hole straight. So now when I take my blank, and here's one of the holes I want to put. So I put that up against there, and I know that is setting exactly 90 degrees to this tabletop right now. So when I take my drill bit, which would be my 7/16 drill bit, and I put it in here, and I want to drill that hole that's marked, I can hold this now with one hand, like so, put my drill into there, into the starter hole, and then all I got to do is watch my bubble, and I can drill this out, turn it over, and drill the other one out. Since they're both pre-marked, I know they're going to come out right. And again, I'll only go into, I go just past the line of that finger, and then when I come through on the other side, I'll go just past it. You don't necessarily need those holes to line up to each other at this point, but if you marked it out properly, they will eventually line up. So then from there we go to the table saw. We'll cut the fingers, the finger joints on both ends of this. Then we go over to the bale sander, and I'll round them over this way so that you'll have it rounded over. Go to the scroll saw and cut it apart, and then we'll come back here and we'll drill this hole then in this part of the hinge, because we haven't drilled that yet. If you remember, the only thing we drilled were these two here, and now we're going to bring everything together. So let's go ahead and let's drill this out, and I'll show you how I set it up on the drill press here. And we're going to go over there and do this, and I'm not going to stop, so this thing's going to take a little while yet for us to go through everything. Looks like we're looking at 20-25 minutes here. So let's go over and do this real quick while we got everything we need, and then we're going to go over and do the rest of these steps and come back here, okay? So stay with me. There's a lot here for you to see and to learn as we go through these items, okay? So let's take my blank, and we're all going to come over here to my workbench, to my drill press. And I've already got this set up, and I have this set up so that it lines up perfectly for me to drill this hole right here. And then when I flip it, now normally when you flip it, you're not referencing the same face. So that's why it's critical that you have this set exactly where it needs to be, so that when I put it in here this way, it's still lining up to that hole there. So, and then what we do is we're just going to drill out both of these using the drill press. So let's go ahead and drill these out. Now there's some shavings on there. I do keep a little toothbrush here, and that kind of helps clean them off when they're on there without having to shut it off. And now, so now the hard part is done. I got the hole drilled out for both of these on my drill press. So once I've drilled out all my holes on the double finger end, now we're going to go over and we'll do this on the table saw. So I got to take this whole thing over here. Let me take you over here by my table saw. Right here. And I think that should get you pretty close to where you need to be right there. So let me grab my piece. And if you've seen me cut, so when I set this up, first off, I set the height of my dado stack. This is a 1/4 inch dado stack. I always have this set up in this table saw like that all the time. I have my anchor jig here, and it's been zeroed out to the left side of my blade. And what I want to do now is cut these fingers out so that when I get done, the board will look like this. One finger on one end and 2 fingers on the other end. And that's done here with only making one adjustment on the anchor jig to be able to cut these. So let's cut the single finger, the bottom here. Let's do that one first. So I set this up to a 1/2 inch from the left side of my saw, which really is 3/4 inch from the right hand side. That is so that when I set this in here to cut out this corner, the inside of this blade, the right side of this blade is going to come out right on that cut line of where I marked that line on here. So I just set that in here. I'm going to fire it up. We're going to cut it. Then I'm going to reverse it around, put it up against there, and I'm going to cut the other one. Then we're going to take and cut the outside edges for the inner finger, and I'll show you what we're doing. Okay, you ready? Okay. Now we're going to set it up to cut the outside edges or the inside edges for these two fingers. I'll waste this material away once we do the other part. So I flip it over and I set it in here. Now we want to move this a ½ inch, a 1/4 inch. So if I bring this over 1/4 inch exactly, and I put this up against there, the left side of my blade is now in alignment with my wood, with my pencil line here. So that will cut the inside edge of my double finger right here for this waste material to come out in between here. So I put this in here. Flip it around so I can get the other edge. And now, all I have to do is waste away the rest of the material. So if I take this out of my way, I can set this here. Like so. Okay, now let's waste away the center here. And now this is now cut to be like this one. And of course, they fit into each other like we want. So we'll final adjust that when we get back to the table. But now that we've done that, the next step is right here. And we're going to take these using this flat edge up on edge, and we're going to round these upper edges so that we end up with this configuration here. So you just take your piece that you're cutting, and I usually go at a 45, and I try to wear away the corner like so. Don't overdo it. And then I start rounding it over until I've done both this side here, and you want to keep this as upright as you can when you're doing this, because you want this to be on this curving between both fingers. You want that to be on the same plane as you come across, if possible. So try to keep it flat as you can and going back and forth till you get a nice round curvature. Pretty close. And try never to take anything off the very top here if you can help it. Because if you do, you'll shorten the distance here and you end up creating a gap. In between there is what you end up doing. So, and you don't want a gap like that in there. So try not to take too much off. Now that we've done that, now I'm going to go to the scroll saw and I'll cut this out real quick and we'll go back to the table where we'll do the rest of this, okay? So okay, and now we've cut it apart. So sometimes, now this one came out a little rough, so I may have to come in here and do some minor sanding on it to clean it up. And now we're ready to turn this into a regular hinge. Now normally I would take and round everything over on the table saw, but we're going to go straight back to the table. So we're going to take this with us. Might as well take these with us too. And I think we got everything else. Let's go back to the table and finish this thing up. Shouldn't take too long to finish it at this point. So, this is where you'll spend most of your time finessing these hinges till you're happy with them. Kind of the same way you would do that to like if you were doing a dovetail hinge. And quite honestly, a dovetail hinge, a dovetail joint is, when you hand make it, it takes practice, and after a while you learn to get better and better at it. Making hinges is the same thing. So now we have our blanks here. The next step is, let's drill the pinhole on this one, and we use this one as a guide to drill this out. So again, we go back to our straight block here, and I'm going to put this one in here. And since I'm left-handed, I'm going to put it on this side, like so, and try to get it as straight and as level as I can. Like that. Now we take this one and set it in there. And I have this set pretty close to where I want. So I'm going to take my drill bit, and again, it's the smallest one. It's the 7/64 for now. And let's drill this out. So I'm going to drill this part way in. From here, now I have that hole started. Let's turn it over. Like so, and finish drilling it from this side. And I felt it go through. So now we have that hole drilled in here. We shouldn't need this anymore. So So now I have my second hinge right here. And I actually should be able to really come pretty close to making this work. So I think I'm going to drill this out right now with the smallest drill bit because I can't quite get it to go in everywhere. So I'm going to put it on there and let's drill this out. Uh-oh. I just dropped that drill bit. Oh, it went in my pocket. Okay. And let's drill it from this way. And I'd say that pin is ready to go. Now all we got to do is make it to the right size. So first thing I'm going to do is switch out to my 1/8 inch. Right here, my 1/8 inch drill bit. And I'm going to freehand drill these to 1/8 of an inch. And that should give us pretty close to being able to put this pin in. See, it just barely fits through there. It's way too snug. So what you can do, if you want it to be snug in here, you can take and oversize this hole just a little bit. You can do it on one side. If you think you need to, you can do it to both sides or just one side to the next size on the drill bit. That's the largest one. Yeah, that's the largest one. So now this pin drops in there very nicely and lines up. And it goes from either direction. But it's going to be snug through this center pin, through that center finger, because so if I drive that in, you can kind of see where that's going. So, and I can tell you now, I don't like this at all. So I'm going to go ahead, like I always do. Really being difficult. We got a problem here. So we're going to go ahead and drill these out to the maximum. Ah, heck of a time for my battery to go dead. Drill this one out to that bigger size. And now, I think we should be able to get this pin to fit all the way in. There we go. And we now have a working hinge. Now you see how hard it is to work? The reason that is hard is if you look in between on these cracks, I can see it touching and rubbing at one or two places. And right there, it's not touching anywhere. But as I move it, now I can see where it's rubbing both of these. It's rubbing both of these at the same time against the flat part here and here. There's still a gap on this center finger against this flat part. So I think what I'm going to do, this is where you have to finesse. I do have a sanding block here, which is the width of my fingers, so that I can put this in here. And we want to take a little bit off of these two here. So I'm just going to take my sanding block and give it 10 or 15 or 20, something like that. good hard sanding across there flat. If it was tight in here between the finger, then I would sand on this surface some to thin it out. This one fits pretty good right now. I'm pretty happy with that fit. So let's see if I sanded enough of this away to get these to stop rubbing on here. So if I put this together, put that in there, and there we go. It's still touching, just ever so slightly. Let me see where it's touching. Probably what I would do, because it seems to be touching very even. When I move it, it's touching now on the curved part, not on the flat part. And so I think that I probably need to take this over there and sand this down just a little more. So I'm going to walk over there, right there, and sand this a little bit. Try to sand it both from the bottom against here and from the top to ensure that I keep this as flat as I can and on the same plane around. So you want to do it in both ways. Just like drilling in a hole from both directions, you want to sand this down against here and arc it from both sides so that it gives you a much better plane. I sanded it down a little bit. So, and theoretically, that should be enough to be able to put this back together. And now, look at there. Just like that, we have a nice little working hinge. So, and then if I wanted to make it a permanent hinge, I would take my short piece of rod, drop it down in there, and now it's recessed on both of them, and you got a nice little working hinge here without any problems. Some good hand sanding cleanup, and you now have a second hinge. It only took 32 minutes to get here. Sorry it took so long. I didn't think it would take this long, but it is what it is. There's a lot of little things you have to do. You want to make sure when you're done, if you drilled that pin straight, then you should see the same kind of air gap in all of your locations. Now I can tell you right now, this center finger barely touches, and I can feel it when I move it, and I can see the gap go away, the light, and then come back. So there's a spot there. I could do the same thing to this that I did to this one over on the belt sander in just a couple of seconds, and it would take that away too. But the beauty of this is what's really cool about it. Let me take this pin out. Oops, not quite enough. And I take this one. These two have the blue on the back, and those were the two that was one board. But I can actually take this other one now, and theoretically I should be able to put that one and put that in there, and I get a nice working hinge. How about that? And that means that theoretically I ought to be able to do the same thing with this one. So you see, I got some nice working hinges. The parts are interchangeable. They're also interchangeable to go this way so that you can put it in any direction you want. These are going to be some nice, great hinges to keep on hand for whatever I need. This design. So I think I'm going to make a half a dozen or a dozen of these and put them in my drawer. So if I need hinges, I'll be able to grab these and take them out. Now, you can finesse these to any shape you want. And even after this, now that I've done this, this is a nice simple shape out of a nice square piece of wood when I got done. And it makes for a good hinge. And I can put 3 screws in here without any problem to give me a good firm grip to wherever I want to mount this on whatever material for a hinge. I also can take and I can shade this down here to make this thinner. Kind of like the way the profile of a regular, this is a straight butt hinge that's made of metal, and you can see how the barrel is fatter than the plate. And I could do that to here. Now I'm going to show you, first time somebody else will ever see these. This is my first set of hinges I ever made. And I made these with the Hinge jig. The way they show you in the book to do it, I made these hinges with that, and they are ugly, as you can see. But the point was, they fold over flat all the way because I did take and cut these down to make the barrel thicker than the actual plate of the hinge, so that allows them to actually fold over completely. You do that to this one the same way. Cut it down and cut it and thin it down from where the barrel is, thin it down from here on back, and you could end up getting a hinge that will fold over flat instead. You would also have to do it to this one. So if you cut away half the material on the top of both of these, then they will fold all the way to each other. And that's the way you get to a hinge like this. Look at that ugly thing. Look at all the gaps and the crooked. And it was really, but I kept them. These were my first hinges I made, and I decided that I learned a lot when I made these. So don't be discouraged. Not only that, you see how this one does this, right? Duh. And this one, I put it together backwards. So now I can't get it to go flat. So first set, what can I say? So make your first set, set them aside so you got them. You can look at them in a couple of years and see how far along you've come since your first set. But you will make ugly wood hinges. I guarantee it. You can fix hinges when they have a problem. For example, I'll take this hinge right here. If you take this hinge here, if you see, when I put these together, there's a gap. As I lift this one up and down, you can see that they move back and forth. Well, you have to be careful that if you get your finger joint too loose, you're going to get that up and down play like I do right here. And if you do, there's still something you can do about that. If you have a problem with this pin being way too loose on this finger, then what you want to do is take the same kind of wood like this and cut off a piece, sand it down to the right thickness so that when you put these two pieces together, you want to be able to slip this piece in between those two fingers on one side or the other. And you actually then will glue this small piece to the inside face of one of your fingers like that to make this gap smaller. That's the way to make that gap smaller so that then the finger will fit in there way too tight. At that point, then you get your sanding the piece out and then you start sanding that new veneer. In fact, if you take a look at this one, this one, that's exactly what I did here. This finger turned out to be too wide here. And I don't know how I did that, but I accidentally got this one too wide. And it was really a lot of slack between that finger sitting in there. So I just cut a little piece and glued it in place. Drilled a hole back through here to go all the way through again. And now I have that little patch on there, which is very difficult to see. When I final sand this and I put this all in together, quite honestly, I don't think you really will even notice. Nobody will even really notice that has that on that hinge. So you can fix these hinges pretty easily too. If you get a pin, here's a good example. Well, let's use this one. This is another good point here I'm going to have to make. So if you want to go ahead and leave, you're an expert on making them. But if you want to make them good, there's a couple more things you want to know. So if you take a look at this hinge right here, look at the gap between the end of the finger on this piece and the notched area on this piece. And you can see that gap on all of them right there. And the reason is that I sanded away too much after I drilled, and I went too far. But you can actually fix that too. As long as nothing is broken, I can pull that pin out, put a dowel, a wood dowel of some kind, and glue it in again, and cut that dowel loose completely. And I can come in here and put this together using this method. I can put them two together, put them together, push them together, and re-drill that hole with my drill press, either here or on there, by having the whole pieces all together and drill that hole all the way through. You just got to make sure you get a good straight hole all the way through when you do that. And you can do that if you're careful. So you can fix a hinge when it's like that if you want to fix it. I sometimes, most of the time, if I get a little bit too much gap, I usually don't worry about it. I just leave it, because most people, they don't really care about that sort of thing. But if you really want to make a hinge that is even better and tighter, you can do that. And this is one of the methods you can use, because you can make these pins and these hinges fit together so perfectly that you can't, they just fit together just perfectly without any problem, with just a little bit of work. The more you make, the more you'll see how you can do all these little things to make them even better. But they're a lot of fun to make. I make hinges almost exclusively anymore. I probably have maybe 3 times in the last 8 years have I used store-bought hinges. 99% of the time, I use my own hinges that I make. They're a skill, just like cutting hand-cut dovetails. You have to learn. It's not that hard. It does take a little bit of practice. But once you get that done, and you get a good working hinge, and you find that it's, as you can see, I made this second one pretty fast. This one went pretty much the same speed. Once you get set up, you can really do a lot of hinges in a very short time. Now I could final sand this and clean it up and make it look nice and pretty, which I will do when I go to use it somewhere. Since I don't have a purpose for this, I'm just going to leave them like this. I'll do the other two to get them up to speed to be like this. It won't, as you can see, it won't take long to take them from here to here. And then I'll clean them all up and I'll put them aside, and then I'll have a nice set of 4 hinges that I can use on a cabinet, on a double door cabinet or something if I want. So anyway, we did it. We finally got a full-fledged hinge. Yes, it took 45 minutes. I was afraid it would. But anyway, I'm glad I'm done. If you stayed to the end, my hat's off to you, or at least tipped up. So, and I want to thank you for coming by. There's a lot of little tips here. If you have any questions about any of this, about how to do something a little bit different or better, let me know. You do need to acquire the skill. It doesn't just mean you're going to have a perfect hinge when you first do it. But with a little bit of practice, the more hinges you make, the better they'll all start to look. And you'll see a big difference pretty quick. It's easier to learn to make hinges than it is to hand-cut dovetails. Believe me, I know. I can do both. So, if you had questions or comments, leave them in the comments. And thank you for staying to the very end here. This probably was pretty difficult. I hope you still got some coffee left. Oh, I do. In any case, if you learned something here and you like this video, hit that like button. It lets me know I did the right thing and I'm going the right way. But most importantly, please come back again, because honestly, as you can see, I'm nowhere near done. So I still got more to go. So thanks for coming by, and I hope you liked this video. If you did, say so. If you have any suggestions on how to make them shorter next time, I'd like to do more of these where I actually do the different steps, like Woodwright Shop did. But that's going to take a little bit of practice, as you can see. So anyway, all words of encouragement are appreciated. but I'm nowhere near done. I've been rambling again. Thanks for coming by, and we'll see all you guys again, and gals. We'll see you all very soon again.